Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and Frontline is back in 2020 and what Wargaming are calling the Expedition. So just what is the Expedition? Well, the Expedition is 4 stages of Frontline over the next 4 months, which is starting right now, and then there are going to be 4 months of Steel Hunter after that, which is kind of a 1 versus 1 versus 1 versus 1 game mode in a battle royale format. Now, if you want to get yourself the new vehicles which I featured on this tank on Saturday and Sunday, aka the Object 777 version 2 and also the Charioteer 4, then your only choice is to complete all of Frontline, reaching rank 15 in each of the 4 weeks that will be available, and also to be able to, I guess, achieve the maximum rank inside Steel Hunter for each of the weeks that's going to be available. Now, if you missed out on the AE Phase 1 last year, you could actually choose the AE Phase 1 instead of one of these 2 new tanks, but the bottom line is that you're going to have to complete all 8 stages if you want to get a choice of 2 out of the 3. Of course, if for some reason you don't like Frontline or you don't like Steel Hunter, then if you complete either the whole of Frontline in each of the 4 weeks or the whole of Steel Hunter in each of those 4 weeks, then you will be able to pick 1 out of the 2 tanks available. So with that in mind, and hopefully all of you firmly up to date, now I'm going to let you know what are my favorite vehicles for Frontline. So if you're just starting out in 2020, you didn't play last year, then hopefully I can give you a head start. Or alternatively, if maybe you're not getting General as many times as you would want to, then maybe a pick of a few of these vehicles might help you out in the right situation. So firstly, before I inevitably talk about premium tanks, I want to help out all the free-to-play players out there and let you know what are my favorite tech tree tanks for Frontline. Okay, so firstly, look no further than the Lynx 6x6. This wheeled vehicle is absolutely phenomenal for a very large map. Remember, Frontline, the area is 9 times larger than the largest standard map outside of Grand Battles. It's a 9-kilometer squared map, and so being able to get around at 80 kilometers an hour can really help. A vehicle like this can be able to change for entire fronts, get to a cap circle to maybe interrupt it, or alternatively get to a new one to be able to cap it out. This is your golden ticket if you're a good light tank player, and even if you're not, if you're just able to go and sit in cap circles sometimes, to being able to pumping up your ranks. If you can't stand wheeled vehicles for some reason, then you could probably also do very well in the Chatillon 12T. Just keep in mind that the autoloader, with its very low penetration, won't be able to compete with quite a few of the medium tanks, let alone the heavy tanks. I also see some people using the Lttb, although I think it's just a little bit too large, and while its armor can work against the non-gold spam, which is very refreshing inside Frontline, with its limited view range, it's still not one of my favorite vehicles. Medium tank wise, there aren't really too many vehicles that I would pick for Frontline outside of the premium vehicles. Maybe you could make the T69 work, although again, quite lacking on the penetration department unless you load the gold. The T44, obviously just an all-round purpose tank. It can go everywhere, do everything, and there's lots of ridge lines in Frontline that you can use where you can make this tank's 7 degrees of gun depression work exceedingly well. However, by far the best standard medium tank to use for Frontline is the P44 Pantera. It has enough armor at the front of the vehicle to be able to take all of those pesky high explosive rounds with 80 on the front of the hull and 120 on the front of the turret, and to be the only auto-reloading tech tree vehicle, I guess, outside of the IS-22 now. Auto-reloaders inside Frontline are absolutely king. Your Inspire is going to work with this auto-reloader, meaning that you can whittle down your opponents one by one, single shot, until you can then get them to that kind of sweet spot around 650, where then you can finish them off with your 3 remaining rounds which you've saved up. The vehicle has also got a really good aim time, really good accuracy, and decent enough penetration on its standard rounds. This is the one that you want to get as probably your first pick, along with the Lynx if you're a free-to-play player. The other vehicle that I would recommend is the UDES 14 Alt 5. This thing, with its 360 alpha damage and very decent penetration on its standard rounds, including great gun depression, is very pokey indeed. And even its mid-plate can actually ricochet quite a few shells from people that are just auto-aiming at you. This is definitely one of the better Tier 8 tech tree tanks. Heavy tank-wise, I don't think you can really go too wrong with a double-barreled vehicle if you know that you're not going to have to drive too far. The IS-22 has very decent damage per minute for a heavy tank, and the ability to land a double shot on something that's vulnerable, or maybe just to secure a kill inside the cap circle and get all of those juicy reset points, definitely puts this tank up there on my list. I also quite like the Markovsky Go, but maybe that's just a personal preference. 420 alpha, a decent speed, 8 degrees of gun depression. I think this is a solid pick. The T-32, also a very nice pick for Frontline if you don't have any premium vehicles of the Tier 8 heavy variety. Its penetration is a big letdown against Tier 9 and Tier 10 tanks, but you don't have to deal with them in Frontline. Combine this with 10 degrees of gun depression and a fantastic turret, and very good upper hull armor also against standard Tier 8 rounds, and this thing is quite a performer. The other vehicle that I would pick is going to be the 50-100. This thing with its 6-round 100mm autoloader can deal 1,800 damage, which is more than enough to be able to take out the entirety of a vehicle or pick apart multiple weakened allies. Or should I say enemies? Hopefully you're not going to be shooting your allies in Frontline. That's not even possible. The other tank that I would pick situationally is the Emile. I think this thing set up with binoculars, vents, and the plethora of defender abilities could be really nice for interrupting some of the cap circles where you can get into a nice gun depression position. Think about the F cap on Normandy. That is where this thing will come into its environment, and I've made many a captain or a major game go straight to general just by defending that cap circle at the end. Tank destroy-wise, I've seen lots of players do very well with the Charioteer. This thing has more than enough penetration to never have to load the gold, and in fact the gold rounds, they're Hesh rounds, but this got really good cheap HE as well with 105mm of penetration and 480 alpha damage. This thing has 10 degrees of gun depression, the flexibility that you need to be able to get around, and with a decent crew it's also going to have a great concealment value. This is definitely one of the best Frontline vehicles. The only thing that sucks about it is its accuracy isn't 10 out of 10 for a tank destroyer, but it's by no means terrible, and it is kind of limited at its 52 km/h top speed. But I think that's going to be the case for the vast majority of tank destroyers. I've also seen some people doing well with the AMX AC Emile 48. People have to aim at weak points of this vehicle with their standard rounds, and while there are 2 gigantic weak points on top of the tank, how can you say no to being able to deal 1,200 damage within 5 seconds of the first shot? This thing is quite the farmer. But I personally wouldn't pick this because it's just not very flexible at all. The UDES, on the other hand, is a very sneaky sniper, able to go backwards faster than a lot of tanks can go forwards, and able to go at 70 km/h forwards. This thing has the highest penetration of any standard round at Tier 8, as well as having the best accuracy in the game. If you're willing to play the long-range defensive role, then I think this will be a great tank. I wouldn't necessarily use this thing when attacking though. So artillery-wise, I think that all 4 of the artilleries have different benefits. If you want to have that kind of big splash, the M40, M43 can be very useful. The Su-14-2, again, for the exact same reason as it gets the same gun. The French vehicle is much more accurate, but my biggest recommendation would be the FV-207. This vehicle, with its improved fire rate, while still having a very nice splash radius, can keep interrupting the cap circle. And remember, a rate of fire is very important, because as soon as you put the engineering perk on this tank, having a great rate of fire will allow you to keep that ticking, and in the right situation you can get almost instant general in this artillery piece. Alright, so now I'm going to do the same thing again, but we're going to be doing it as if you had every single premium tank in the game. If you were the biggest whale that Wargaming has managed to harpoon inside their free-to-play title. Yeah, just like me. So firstly, my number 1 pick for Frontline is the EBR-75. How can you not enjoy 80 forwards, 80 backwards, and have a little 2-punch autoloader that you can also load high explosive rounds? With high explosive rounds loaded in this vehicle, you can really pump up the damage per minute that the tank has, as well as 2-shotting artillery, which is oh so rewarding. Being able to very quickly reload 2 shots inside this tank as well allows you to make precision interrupts against enemies that are taking your cap circle. But more importantly, the ludicrous speed that this tank has and its very tricky small hull armor to be able to hit means that one of my favorite tactics is to get into your cap circle while your opponents are capping it, use high level combat reserve engineering, and just dance around, and you're literally going to see your progress bar ticking up. This thing is completely OP for Frontline. It's almost as if it was specifically designed for the game mode. Another light tank I enjoy, of course, is going to be the LT-432. This is the harder hitting of the 2 light tanks which I've talked about so far of the premium variety, but with 7 degrees of gun depression, incredible gun handling, and enough armor to be able to ricochet very frequently indeed and completely obliterate most EBRs that you go and engage. This thing is an absolute monster. It's also able to go at 70 forwards. It's got a great camo rating. You really can't go wrong with the LT-432. So if you don't have either of these 2 vehicles, I think it's really a toss-up between maybe the HWK-30, either the T-92 or even the Taiwanese dog, the M41D. All of these vehicles are good for the same kind of reason. A good rate of fire, good gun depression, reasonable mobility, and camo rating that a lot of the medium tanks lack. But really, I don't feel that they're light tank enough compared to the EBR, the Lynx, and the LT432 to justify really playing them if you also have a plethora of medium tanks at your disposal. So by far the best medium tank for Frontline is the Projeto 46. This thing is phenomenal. This auto reloader gets very, very, very powerful in Frontline for one specific reason, and that is Inspire. If you can get the Combat Reserve Inspire to a high level, you're going to be getting 15% more crew skill. This means that in single shot mode, with an Inspire activated, you can actually be firing 10 rounds a minute or even more. If you're willing to use a premium consumable in this tank, it's probably going to get closer to 5.5 seconds reload time. That is incredibly dominant, and it's one of the most powerful things about the Projeto compared to other autoloaders. Other autoloaders with Inspire, all they really get is increased accuracy and better aim time and gun handling. The Projeto gets a better rate of fire as well. Sure, its intra-clip reload doesn't get better, but what you can do is just keep firing one weight, and then once you've lowered your opponent's hit points to roughly about the 650 mark, which is the sweet spot for RNG for the remaining 3 shells, unload them in 4 seconds, and this is probably the best 1v1 tank outside of something like a 5100 or a Lorraine. It's my top pick for Frontline, and yeah, you can't go wrong with this beast. Other vehicles that I like, of course, are going to be the Skoda T27. This is kind of a vehicle that I would take if I didn't have the Lorraine. It's got a very pokey gun with a very nice intra-clip reload, and before the Borask, this was some of the highest burst damage that was available. However, I personally prefer the Lorraine. Why? Because of meaty penetration and meaty alpha damage. 232 and 300 alpha damage. This is probably one of the slower medium tanks, believe it or not, and the least flexible one with regards to having to reload for about 30 seconds even with good crew skills. But once you have those 4 100mm rounds loaded, the capacity of doing 1,200 damage within 7.5 seconds of the first shot is just absolutely devastating. And this is the one that I would pick when I maybe only need half a rank more to be able to reach General, and I'm going to rush in and just try and clip something out. So now I want to talk about quite a controversial pick. I want to talk about the Borask. So the Borask is the new kid on the block, and I expect that a lot of people are thinking that it's going to be the daddy of Frontline. I mean, what is there not to love about 360 alpha damage and a 2-round autoloader? So you can deal 720 damage within 2 seconds of the first shot. This is the highest burst damage that you can do on a medium tank or a light tank. However, after playing this tank yesterday, I can tell you, I don't really like it. Do you know why? It's a very big tank. It's very susceptible to high explosive rounds with only 40mm of frontal hull armor, and only 15 on the turret, and it's a very big side profile for HE rounds as well. If you play this thing free to play, even with the best crew loadouts, the 390 meters view range can be very decent, but it's really the gun handling on this tank that just holds it back. 3.5 seconds aim time and 0.42 accuracy. No. Frontline is all about being snappy. This vehicle's reload is incredibly awkward, and while sometimes, sure, the tank can pull off those amazing 1-2 hits and you've dealt 720 damage and you're loving the Borask, for every time that happened, I just got bum rushed by an LT432 who would just dab the 3 key, would you believe it, and be able to do 300 damage to me every 5 seconds. And yet, because of your abysmal penetration at 190 for a medium tank, you kind of have to aim at his weaker points to be able to penetrate them. Furthermore, with only a 2-round autoloader, it never feels like you really build up enough of a punch like the Lorraine to be able to deliver it. And if you use Inspire on a vehicle like this, it just feels awful compared to the Projeto in my opinion. Now look, I might be getting a bit hard on the Borask. Look, you can still do very well inside this tank, and I'm sure that if you love this vehicle and you play it carefully, you're going to do great in the vehicle. I just think for the reason of Inspire on the Projeto, the poor penetration on the gun, and just the fact that 720 alpha damage, you can kind of get overwhelmed in the subsequent 20 seconds that it takes to reload this vehicle. I think that this thing is amazing for the random queue, but personally it's not something that I would really want to play in Frontline too much. So if autoloaders and auto-reloaders aren't your thing, then obviously the Lansen can also be great with its 320 alpha damage. Decent mobility and fairly good gun handling, but again, its armor is awful and it gets penetrated by high explosive rounds quite frequently. And I have seen some people using the TL1 LPC with its 280 alpha damage to outtrade people, and it's also got fairly okay armor. If you can keep your front to your opponents, you should be able to stay in it. Alright, so that's enough medium tank picks. Let's talk about the heavy tanks. Okay, my eyes immediately go towards a Sommoir SM. This thing is basically a slower version of the Lorraine, which is even more brutal. You now have 2.25 seconds intra-clip reload with 5 rounds in the magazine. So that means that in just over 11 seconds, you're able to deliver 1,500 damage to your opponents. It's absolutely brutal, this tank. It's also got 10 degrees of gun depression. It's got enough armor to be able to force your opponents to have to aim at you. And if it wasn't for the fairly sluggish mobility of this tank, it would probably be the best frontline vehicle. This is the tank that I'll pick once the lines have been breached. Maybe they're inside your base in Normandy. I'll take this tank. It's got enough armor to be able to bounce it out, and it's got enough damage in that magazine to be able to get almost entire ranks with a single clip. Another autoloader I like for the same reason that I liked the standard Emile is the Emile 1951. I'll set this thing up with binoculars and not coated optics. Actually, that's something that I should do right now. I'll put engineering, inspire, and I'll also take an airstrike on this vehicle, and I'll use it to defend niche locations like C and F on Normandy, where gun depression is king at being able to interrupt the cap circle safely. A vehicle that I think can also work in Frontline now will be the new E75 TS. This is a rather mobile vehicle. It has incredible frontal armor as well. And with a pokey gun and decent view range, I don't think you can really go too wrong with this heavy tank, which is quite refreshing. I also managed to play the Object 703 version 2 inside Frontline a little bit yesterday, and I can tell you again, the frontal armor on this tank is awesome, and being able to deliver a 780 alpha damage double shot is monstrous. But the vehicle does feel a little bit too sluggish, and so unless you know where the unless you know you're going into a situation which is going to be very bogged down for a little while, and you're going to have to really grind your opponents out and not have to race to the next cap circle, I think there are probably some better picks out there. One tank that I would recommend as well is the Renegade. This thing is fast, it's got 360 alpha damage, and I probably actually prefer it over the Patriot now. And of course, it should pretty much go without mentioning that the Defender is also an absolute boss inside Frontline. People pretty much can't penetrate you frontally. You can sit in awkward positions, and unless they shoot your cupolas on top of the vehicle, you're an absolute monster with 440 alpha damage. It's kind of like a tier 8.5 tank, so why wouldn't you take it in Frontline? And so finally, let's also talk about the tank destroyers that are available. There's not so many premium tank destroyers. I think the TS5 you will be able to do very well with, again, for the reasons of having practically impenetrable frontal armor with standard rounds. But I also think this thing is incredibly sluggish, and I personally wouldn't take this vehicle over, say, an auto-loading heavy. The SU-130 PM, however, is a great vehicle when you're defending and you know the enemies are going to have to come towards you, for the same reason that the Scorpion G is as well. But personally, I probably wouldn't take the Scorpion G over the SU-130 PM because of alpha damage, and also the SU-130 PM just has that better concealment rating that might keep you hidden for longer. And so there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Hopefully I just answered all of the most frequently asked questions I get whenever I stream Frontline right now, and that is, what do you think of this tank? Should I pick this tank for Frontline? There you go, it's done. That's my list. Hopefully it was useful and allows you to get more captains, majors, or even generals inside your game. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And all that's really left to say is just best of luck to all of you inside your Frontline endeavors. And yeah, come along on one of the streams this week and I can show you why I usually end up getting general in pretty much maybe 2/3 or 3/4 of my games. I'll try and talk through the meta. Feel free to ask any questions that you can about that. And you'll mostly see me trying to get towards cap circles as frantically as I can. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.